Jared Dillian Show.
I'm Jared Dillian. This is the Jared Dillian Show. If you want to call to talk about your money, please call 844-305-7800. That's 844-305-7800. This is the Jared Dillian Show. So, Steve Mnuchin, I don't know if you know who that is. He's the Treasury Secretary. He has had a very colorful life. If you don't know who he is, he's frequently spotted with Donald Trump. He's kind of a strange-looking guy. He's got black hair and the big, thick-rimmed glasses. And his wife is a man-eater. Like, she's crazy. Her name's Louise Linton. She was an actress. She's been out of the spotlight over the last couple of years. But Steve Mnuchin has led a very colorful life. You know, he was head of mortgages at Goldman Sachs, like the head mortgage trader. His father was on Wall Street, too, also at Goldman Sachs. And in between, he was a Hollywood mogul. He produced dozens of films, right? He's done a lot of crazy stuff. So he was at Goldman Sachs. He produced a bunch of movies. He's married to a man-eater. He's a Treasury Secretary. And still, this guy cannot issue 50 and 100-year bonds. This is a no-brainer. If you saw what a mess our Treasury issuance is, see, we've issued a lot of debt in the past year. Now, our Treasury debt is across different maturities. We have T-bills, which are 1 month, 3 month, 6 month, and a year. Those are discount instruments. They don't pay coupons. Then, in terms of bonds, you have 2-year notes, 3-year notes, 5-year notes, 7-year notes, 10-year notes, 20-year notes, and 30-year bonds. Okay, so the longest maturity we have is 30-year bonds, which is a little bit strange because a lot of countries have bonds that are maturities longer than 30 years. Japan has 40-year bonds. Argentina, a couple years ago, issued 100-year bonds. They were called centenarios. They went bankrupt. Austria has a 100-year bond. The thing is going parabolic. Now, you're like, why? What is the point of a 100-year bond? Now, why would you buy a 100-year bond? Because if you bought a 100-year bond at issuance, you would die before it matures, right? And a lot of things can happen in 100 years. Coke at one point had 100-year bonds, and they matured. They actually were around for 100 years, and a lot of things happened. We had World War II. I mean, come on. So 100-year bonds are nuts. But if you're the government, if you are Steve Mnuchin, and his job is to manage our debt across maturities, and right now, all of our debt is concentrated at the very short end. Bills. Trillions of dollars of debt in bills. I don't know what the average maturity of our debt is nowadays. I want to say it's like 3 years or 4 years or something like that. But that's very bad. And let me explain why it's bad. All of our debt is in bills. If interest rates go up, we have to roll that debt into higher interest rates. Okay. Now, I don't predict that interest rates are going to go up anytime soon, but I'm just saying if they did, our interest expense would dramatically increase. And if you're Steve Mnuchin, what you care about is interest expense, right? The amount of money that the government pays each year in interest. We're paying about $300 billion a year in interest, which is not a lot because interest rates are very low. What you would want to do is extend the maturities of your debt as far as possible. If you're issuing a 100-year bond, it's essentially like permanent capital. Like you never have to pay it back. It's permanent capital, and it's at a very low interest rate. Now, our 30-year bonds are currently around 1.5%. My guess is if we issued 50-year bonds, they would be about 1.8%, and if we issued 100-year bonds, they'd be about 2.1 or 2.2%. Can you imagine locking in a massive amount of debt at 2.2% for 100 years? Interest rates are at the all-time lows. Interest rates are at the all-time lows. Why would you not want to lock that in forever? Lock it in for 100 years. So back when Trump was elected back in 2016, he said Steve Mnuchin was going to be Treasury Secretary. And one of the first things that Steve Mnuchin did was he said he was going to issue a 50 and 100-year bonds. And it was interesting at the time because the yield curve steepened dramatically, which is kind of technical. I don't want to get into it right now. But basically what the market was saying was they were anticipating the issuance of these longer maturities. Anyway, if you're the Treasury Secretary, if you're going to be selling these bonds, you have to find buyers for these bonds. And the logical buyers for these bonds are pension funds because they have very long duration liabilities. And according to Steve Mnuchin, he went around to all these pension funds and they said, yeah, we don't really need 100-year bonds. And so that was the end of the discussion. He didn't issue 100-year bonds. Now, back about a year ago when interest rates got so low, he started the discussion again. He says, I want to issue 50 and 100-year bonds. He had the same discussion with the pension funds, and they said, yeah, we really don't need 100-year bonds. And so Steve Mnuchin has this idea that there is going to be zero demand for ultra-long maturities. And I totally disagree. I think there's a huge demand for ultra-long maturities. People are starved for yield. If the yield is a little bit higher, let's say it's 2.5%. If the yield is 2.5%, people are going to take it, especially since in the United States, we are one of the few developed countries in the world that has positive interest rates. In Europe, they're all negative. In Japan, they're negative. Most places in the world, they're negative. In the U.S., they're positive, which makes our bonds attractive. There would be no shortage of buyers for 50 and 100-year bonds. If you think about how, and Steve Mnuchin is smarter than me and more successful, and his wife is a man-eater and all that stuff. And I don't doubt that. I don't doubt his sincere attempts to issue ultra-long bonds. I doubt that it can't be done. I doubt that it can't be done. And at a minimum, all this issuance that we have at the front end of the curve in bills, we should at least be moving it out the curve to 10s, 20s, and 30s, which we're not doing. You know, the quarterly refundings that we're doing in 30-year bonds should be twice as large. We should just be dumping these bonds on the market and at least lock in these interest rates for 30 years, So, the average maturity of our debt used to be a lot bigger, and now it's smaller. And one of these days, we're going to have a debt crisis. And maybe we will, maybe we won't. Maybe we're going to live in an MMT world. Maybe the Fed's just going to buy all the debt. I don't know what's going to happen. But if I was Treasury Secretary, that would be my one mission in life, is to extend the maturities of these bonds. Extend them and lock in those low interest rates. And we're not doing it. We're not doing it. Nobody talks about this. Now, if you go back, like I said, Steve Mnuchin is great. And his Treasury Department is full of smart people, a lot of ex-Wall Street people. If you go back to when Obama was president, he had two Treasury Secretaries. The first one was Tim Geithner. And Tim Geithner was the Treasury Secretary during the financial crisis. He was a little bit over his head. And then he had Jack Lew, and Jack Lew was kind of a career politician. And if you looked at the composition of the Treasury Department during the Obama years, if you looked at all the senior level people, they were really all political hacks. You didn't really have markets people. You know what I mean? So it's good to have a Treasury Department filled with people that know how the bond market works. Jack Lew wouldn't know convexity if it punched him in the nose. The one thing that Treasury tried to do when Obama was president was they got rid of the best program they had. They got rid of the best program they had, which was the savings bonds, the Series EE savings bonds. Best thing that the Treasury Department did. They got rid of it to get rid of 800 jobs printing these things in Pittsburgh to save money, and they started this thing called MIRA, My Retirement Account. And this was their idea, to get people to invest in Treasury bonds. And over the course of 8 years of Obama's presidency, they collected $80 million in assets. It was a complete failure. And that was the one thing that the Treasury Department did. When Trump was elected and Steve Mnuchin became Treasury Secretary, the first thing he did was get rid of the Myra program because it was completely useless. I actually knew somebody from Lehman Brothers who worked in Obama's Treasury Department, and she told me, she says, yeah, she's like, I'm the only person in the whole place that has a background in markets. Now, if Biden gets elected, who is going to be Treasury Secretary? A lot of people think it's going to be Elizabeth Warren. That's a possibility, but she's sort of a loose cannon. Another possibility is Lael Brainerd. You might not have heard of Lael Brainerd. She's on the Fed Board of Governors. She went to Wellesley for undergrad. She's also very liberal. She understands, I think, a lot more about markets than Elizabeth Warren. But either way, in a Biden Treasury Department, this is very important. Like a lot of people, it's not just the guy that signs your dollar bills. It's not just the guy that signs your dollar bills. These are very important people. And these decisions about the maturity of our debt are extremely important because one day this might come back to bite us. One day we might have $1 trillion in interest expense a year, and it's going to be completely untenable. I'm Jared Dillian. This is The Jared Dillian Show.
The Jared Dillian Show.